Hi, my name's Lawrence, also known as Coach Cronk, and in 2025 I got a lottery place to the iconic Leadville 100 mountain bike race, where I achieved a big buckle time in a finish of 8 hours, 58 minutes and 11 seconds. So, in two videos, I'm going to explain firstly my preparation in the first video, walk you through from about 10 months prior to the event, tell you about a big setback that I overcame, and dive into my final 12 weeks where I really turned things around so that I could arrive at the start line in good shape to do well. In the second video, I'm going to talk all things about the race, starting from when I landed in Denver, my approach before I got to the start line, and then how I executed the day. So in these videos, I'm hoping that I can combine my coaching experience and my racing experience to give the age group athlete some really useful takeaways so that you can have a great day at this true bucket list event. Let's zoom back to about November 2024. It's at this point that I already knew that I was doing a long mountain bike event in 2025 because I had entered a race in Austria called the Salzkammergut Trophy, which is actually 200 kilometers with nearly 7,000 meters of ascent in that race. It was deferred from the year before. It actually fell on the due date of my third child, my son. So I deferred it to 2025. So I knew I had something big in the calendar before the lottery announcements for Leadville. Now, I live in Slovenia in the mountains. So roughly from sort of November time, I start to turn my focus to riding indoors only and treat any sort of outdoor riding really as a bonus. And I'm roughly sort of training for between 7.5 hours to maybe 9 hours a week. More like 9 hours if I can get one ride outside in that time. But if it's all on the trainer, 7.5 hours a week is about where I'm at through the coldest winter months here. So you can see on Training Peaks, that's why my CTL, this blue line, is like pretty consistent. There's not much of a change in my training volume here. And in the depths of winter here, it's dipping a little bit more just because the volume's lower because I'm doing all my work indoors. At this point, my FTP is set to about 290. That's going off TrainerRoad's AI FTP detection. I actually think that's probably a bit high for me for that time of year. I'm about 70 kilos, maybe a little bit lighter when I get to the start line of a goal race. And through this period, a typical week for me might look something like this. 5 rides a week. You can see 7 hours, maybe 8.5 to 9 on a good week. And typically, during the winter months, I'll do one VO2 max session, which will be something like 30-30s, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, short on-off repeats, never usually any VO2 intervals longer than a minute at a time. And then the other session will be like a sweet spot session. The majority of the rest of the sessions will be zone 2, possibly a second tempo-y sweet spot session, but I leave that one quite open and I'll just do it if I'm feeling up for it. If I'm not, I'll just keep it to zone 2. So my weeks always hinge around those 2 quality sessions, everything else zone 2, a third tempo-y session as a bonus if I feel ready for it. So that takes us through the winter months here. I had my first race in February, a little bit further south from here where it's a bit warmer. It was a mountain bike race, just a 2 hours, 60k, which is out of my wheelhouse really. My background is Ironman and ultramarathon. It was only when we had our first child which I decided to hit pause on triathlon and just focus on riding bikes instead. So I tend to feature higher up the leaderboard in races that are 4 hours plus. But this race looked fun and I had an absolute blast. And actually, off this volume of training and the types of sessions that I was doing, I came into this race having only ridden outside 3 or 4 times in the month prior, feeling really good. I had a good race and actually scored my highest ever 2-hour heart rate in that race. It was like full gas. The race literally started with a 25-minute climb, so everything got strung out early on, over the top, settle into groups, and just work hard together. After that, the weather starts to improve in the mountains where I live, and I think I was sort of excited and buoyed by my performance. So you see the volumes going up here as I'm just having a bit more fun riding outside, and then I start to sort of settle into a more consistent volume. Then the setback that I mentioned is this period here. A planned minor surgery, which I should have bounced back from within 3 or 4 days, no big deal, actually led to an infection. So I was back in surgery 4 days after the first. I had some really hefty antibiotics and I had to lie in bed for 3 or 4 days after the second one. Then I got back into some riding. We were actually away for a week in Croatia, but I took my mountain bike, completely lucked out. We had some great trails near where we were staying. So I was doing some fun riding there, just building some fitness again. Then something wasn't right, clearly. I suspect my immune system was still not quite right from the 2 surgeries. One of our kids got a little bit sick, and for me, that led to pneumonia. I was really, really unwell. I was in bed pretty much constantly for about 10 days, more antibiotics, and I was really, really weak when I got back into training, which at this point here, which is actually just 12 weeks before Leadville. So really not an ideal period at all. This is probably my most inconsistent period of training I've had, ever. In 10 years plus of doing this. So I initially had to start with 2 weeks of just really training by feel, no planned intervals in those 2 weeks. I was just going out on my bike and saying, right, I'm going to ride down the valley to this village. If I feel rubbish when I get there, then I'll turn around and I'll come home. If I feel okay, I'll try and get to the next village, and so on. So I did some flat, pretty easy rides in the first 2 weeks, and then I got stuck into 10 weeks of really consistent and focused training. So really, once I was ready to follow some structure again, I was just 10 weeks out from Leadville, and also even less time to the Good trophy, which was going to be 13 hours plus on the bike. So I needed to get the training volume in, but I was also really paranoid about getting sick again. So I decided to drop from 5 rides a week to 4 rides a week so that I could maximize rest between the harder sessions, but also just so I could free up time in those days when I was off the bike, where I could be super organized, try and get ahead with work, so I could free up that extra training time in the week. My week still hinged around 2 key sessions. It was always a VO2 max session, which would fall on a Thursday, generally a shorter session. I would nip out to a nearby climb. I could be done within an hour and 20 minutes for that session, a shorter session before a Friday, where I would clear my schedule and I would try and get out for as long as possible and really build from just under 5 hours, 5 hours plus, 6 hours, right up to 7 hours prior to the Good trophy. On a Tuesday, I was doing longer intervals, more sustained power stuff, but with plenty of variation in there. So focusing on lactate clearance with a combination of under-overs. And I would generally, for this session, I would pick a climb that was 45 minutes to 60 minutes away. So I'd have a steady ride out to the climb, I'd do my intervals, and then I would have a steady ride home. So I was getting extra volume in that way. I still kept Sunday free. If I still felt pretty flat after such a big ride on the Friday, then I would keep this as just another steady zone 2 ride. If I came into it feeling recovered, I'd add some structure in there and I would go find some climbs. From where I live, I have a fantastic world-class out and back route that I can do that takes in 4 climbs, where I can add some structure into that and be home, within 3.5 hours. After my first couple of long rides on the road bike, I switched and did my long rides on the mountain bike, so I could spend a long time on the bike I was going to race on in Leadville. Now, I was fully aware that these rides perhaps wouldn't be as good for building fitness as doing these long rides on the road bike, because there's going to be lots of descending, there's going to be lots of coasting, etc. But I really wanted to ride my mountain bike for 5 hours plus and just be absolutely sure that my position was dialed in, so that after 5-6 hours on this bike, I didn't have any saddle discomfort, I didn't have numb hands, I didn't have tight neck, shoulders, etc. So on these rides, I had 2 Allen keys in my pocket that would fit most things, that were easy to get. So on these rides, initially I was making tweaks regularly if I felt that anything was a bit off, until I was absolutely sure that my mountain bike fit was going to be comfortable for long durations. And because I was still building my fitness back again, I wasn't really rocking again at this point. I didn't really have much in the way of sort of targets for these long mountain bike rides. I was just creating routes that looked fun, trying to get to places that I wouldn't normally be able to get to on a training ride from where I live. And I wasn't beating myself up if I got to a section of trail that was like unrideable and I had to hike a bike for a bit. It was just get out and just be outside on your bike all day. The one thing that I was nailing right from the start with these longer sessions though was my eating and drinking, trying to make sure I was dialing in a strategy that was working for me, which I landed on 80 grams of carbs per hour and a minimum of 750 mils of fluid, and I was getting my carbs in through my drink mix and through a combination of bars and gels. So I was making sure that all of these long sessions, in fact all of these sessions that were over sort of 2 hours, I was nailing down that strategy. So then by the time I came round to the South Good Trophy, which fell here, 13 hours on the mountain bike, I was super happy with riding the bike I was going to race on in Leadville for a long period. So 4 weeks out from Leadville, I did the South Good Trophy. I was pretty apprehensive about this one, really because it was a long day out on the mountain bike. I didn't need to do an event this long in preparation from Leadville, and I was really worried about getting ill again, particularly as it was a family trip. We were camping as well, so with 3 young kids in a tent and a 13-hour race, recovery was not going to be great. So I used it as a big training day and a bit of fun, really. The terrain, as you can see, is very, very different to Leadville, just up and down all day, no flat sections really. And I didn't push anything life as hard as I could have. I just used it as a good chance to really practice my nutrition strategy, finish with a bit in the tank, cover as quickly as possible, and get into the final 4 weeks of training for. So Sub-9 hadn't really been on my mind until after the South Good Trophy, when I realised that my fitness was coming back and I was in good shape. I just want to take you back and look into the 2 sorts of interval sessions that I was doing pre-South Good Trophy, and then we'll look into my final 4 weeks and some really specific stuff that I was doing as my final prep. So I would always do this VO2 max session on a Thursday, and it was a combination of either straight up sort of 5x5, 5x4, or some intervals with a little bit more variation, like these hard starts. So like this session, 3 and 5 minute hard starts, where I would do a hard out of the saddle punch at the start of the interval for 15 to 30 seconds, and then I would settle in to like kind of low zone 5 sort of effort, a bit less power obviously than I would do if it was just a straight interval without the hard start. These are absolutely brutal. I would ride them sort of, I'd use the targets as guides and then very much see how I felt on the day. Just make sure I held back a little bit in the first 1 or 2 intervals so that I could, I wouldn't fall off a cliff with my power towards the end of the session. Occasionally, again, just that paranoia about getting sick, I might shut this session down an interval early, just if I felt like doing that last interval was gonna make me dig really, really deep. I might just shut it down. But the reason why I do these VO2s is because with my sort of Ironman background, I've done a lot of like threshold and long steady state intervals in the past, and maybe it's just my physiology as well, but my sort of sustained power is quite a high percentage of my VO2 max. So I find if I just hammer away at threshold intervals, I don't really get much benefit from them. Whereas if I do good quality VO2 max work, it's kind of like a rising tide that lifts all ships for me. So as brutal as these sessions are, For me, they work really well at just improving everything across the board. And then the more interesting session to explain is these sort of lactate clearance intervals that I was doing on a Tuesday. So again, different reasons for these. A good chance to do long, steady intervals, sustained power. But these surges, again, really good for me because with my background, I've never been that good at sort of like punching and recovering. Something I never had to do in triathlon days. Also, I don't have like fast group ride where I live, where I can go and, ride with folks where, I've got to like surge out of corners or close gaps or take turns on the front. So I don't get that like dynamic cycling into my training unless I do something like this. And I just really enjoy this session actually. You're riding tempo on a long climb, then every sort of 2.5 minutes it's 30-second burst, and I would vary that, like sometimes in the saddle, sometimes out of the saddle. And as I got better and better at them, I could hit these surges really quite hard. I'd be generally shooting to see over 360 watts, sometimes over 380 for the surges for 30 seconds, and then I'd be dropping back to like roughly 250-ish in between. Just quite enjoy that session. Good, varied session. And another reason why I knew a session like this would be super helpful for Leadville is because I got in through the lottery. I was going to be starting in the back corral. If I wanted to achieve a good time, I was going to literally be overtaking people all day. So that was going to require some surging and overtaking, bridging gaps, settling in behind somebody, bridging gaps again, etc. So I wanted to have the tools in my toolbox to be able to do that. Now, on the day at Leadville, there was no way I was going to be doing the surges this hard. If I did, I would absolutely pay for it later on in the race. But at least it was something that I had practiced in training, so that during the race I could do those surges at a much lower power, try and be much more smooth with it. But it was something that I knew I could do where, on a long climb like Columbine, for example, when potentially you've got riders coming towards you and you've got to pick your moments to overtake people, I can, do that surge with good control, get round somebody, get back in line, move up to the next person. So that was something I was kind of visualizing as well while I was doing this session. Now, after Saltzkammer Good Trophy, I did start to kind of think a bit more about Sub-9 and whether it would be possible. I run a lot of calculations, dug around in forums, read other people's race reports, tried to gather as much information as I could. And it seemed like a lot of people were saying if you were about 4 watts per kilo at sea level, then it's achievable. I'm a little bit more than that, but then how much my performance would be affected at altitude was a big unknown. And it's sort of, the calculations I was looking at sort of suggested, yeah, if the race was at sea level, it was on, but elevation was a massive unknown. So what I'd also found out is my power meter on my mountain bike, my Axioma pedals, were just not that reliable. The power just seemed to really fade later on into the ride, especially like after a few long descents. I would get back on the flat or another climb, and the power numbers were just getting lower and lower throughout the day. If I went out on the mountain bike and I did like some intervals, and it was on quite smooth gravel, quite consistent gradient, I could just about use it reliably then. But otherwise, I wasn't that confident in the readings they were giving me. So I needed something else to anchor my effort to see if Sub-9 was really doable. So I had a bit of a back and forth with ChatGPT, and we came up with VAM as a good metric to use, which is essentially meters, as a vertical meters climbed per hour. So it's kind of a metric used for sort of climbing pace. And we came up with between 800 meters and 1,000 meters per hour VAM is what folks were climbing at that generally went Sub-9 at Leadville. So what I thought was, right, well, say my power drop-off could be anywhere between 10 and 20% up at altitude. Let's see if I can do rides climbing at close to 1,000 VAM, the top end of that scale. So if I do get that big drop-off in performance, I'm still above that 800 perhaps. And use that as something to kind of anchor my training on and have a go at it over the last few long rides and see what happens. So went out on the mountain bike to a long local gravel climb that's pretty consistent gradient, and I did my surges session again, 4 by 30 minutes, and I tried to hold a VAM that was in that range. So let's just have a little look. So first interval here, normalized power 246. Again, I know really the power was much higher than that. If I did the same heart rate on the road bike for 30 minutes, my power would probably be closer to 280, I think. So again, showing that the power meter is not uber reliable. And my VAM here, look, 978. So close to 1,000 for the first one. For the second one, again, 958. The third one, 949. So we're starting to slip a little bit. And actually, what I did for the fourth one, I was feeling pretty toasted at this point. It was quite a hot day as well in the mountains. So for the fourth one, I actually just put my waterproof jacket on and I just tapped out the fourth climb as a little bit of heat prep work with my jacket on, just sweating away and just not worrying about power. And then just went home. So I kind of felt a bit deflated after that one. I was like, geez, that was only 3 times 30 minutes at that climbing pace, and the session was really tough. But I ran some other little experiments. So this long ride back here, I switched after Salzkammer Good Trophy to do my last long rides on the road bike, because I was super happy that the mountain bike was dialed in, and I knew if I went out on the road bike, I could just have more pressure on the pedals throughout the ride and just really give my fitness a boost, just from being able to be on the pedals for much longer within the ride. So this ride, I planned a route which I can, just move this and get... I planned a route which was supposed to replicate the Leadville route quite well. It was going to be out and back. Here's my Columbine, a big climb in Slovenia here called Golte, 15k road climb. If you watch road cycling this year, this was the final climb on the Queen stage of the Tour of Slovenia. So I did my out and back route, came back, and on this descent here, I suffered a double puncture, and I didn't want to go up into the mountains again with no spares left. So tail between the legs, I hit the valley road and I just chipped home the quickest way possible. But again, I was trying to do all of these climbs at close to 1,000 VAM, and also this time, because I could do it on the road more easily than the mountain bike, I was trying to chip along at a decent, anywhere between 200 and 220 watts on flat also. So let's have a look. I did the big climb here, 956, which came out at 255 watts. And then again, this climb after the big climb, there's a little bit of a dip in the middle of the climb there, so that might affect this. Comes out at 819. It's still within 800 and 1,000, definitely affected by that little dip there. And I was still climbing well even after that big climb on the way home, and I definitely felt it was achievable to climb between 800 and 1,000 for the full 170k this ride was supposed to be. So this is the road and not the mountain bike, so it's going to be easier to achieve that higher VAM, but it was something. Confidence was definitely boosted, and I moved on to my last final big ride on the road bike, which was absolutely incredible route in Slovenia, which I'd had on the back burner as a route to do at some point whilst living here. 7 hours, a loop that goes into Austria around back into Slovenia. The elevation hasn't shown for the second half of the ride, because actually you go through a tunnel at the border, and it seems that my elevation didn't show on my bike computer after the tunnel. Anyway, what I actually did for this ride is I felt so good that instead of a long flat section and then a final climb back to where I live, I felt like I had more to give, and I was like, come on, it's the last big ride, let's make it count. So I actually turned my nose back towards the mountains, and I did 2 back-to-back big climbs to finish. And you can see here, this climb's 30 minutes long. I was still doing 260 watts nearly when I was sort of 6 hours plus into the ride. I rolled down even the valley road riding home. I was still able to just ride at a nice rhythm, get into a nice aero position. I got home and I just said to my wife, that was not my legs. I don't know what happened there. It just felt absolutely great. Nutrition was on point. It was all dialed in. That was a massive confidence boost for a last ride. So the other ride, which I was doing now since South Good Trophy, this Sunday ride, which had kind of been a bit flexible before, I was now on the mountain bike for this ride, and I was doing it in full race kit for Leadville. Everything set up on my bike how I planned to have it on the day, carrying my Usui pack with everything in it that I planned to carry for the day, same bottles on the bike, everything matching race kit. And I was riding this pretty similar route I did 1, 2, 3 times, about 3 hours, and I was trying to ride this at a good strong tempo effort, and I was trying to be super efficient, so trying to ride smoothly like I needed to in Leadville, no big spikes in power, but also just trying to keep the pace as high as possible. So I would get my head down and get aero in any place where I could, and I would try and limit any spikes on the climbs. And you can see actually, for a mountain bike, I did a few sprints actually at the back end of this one, you can see here, but for a mountain bike you can see that this is quite distant power actually really for mountain bike riding. So I was just trying to be super smooth and just ride my bike that few percent above race pace and just get everything super dialed before the day. So that's my Leadville preparation. In the next video I'm going to talk to you about the race itself. I'll start from my arrival in Colorado, a couple of days leading into it, my race story, and hopefully give you some great tips and insights that you can use to have a good day at this awesome event. Now, I have 2 plans in my Training Peaks store. I've got a first timer plan, 28 weeks long. I also have another 28-week competitive higher volume plan. I'll put the links for these down below. If you have any questions, I'll also put my email there, and if you would like to have a chat about coaching, please reach out to me via email. If you like and subscribe, you should get a notification when my race video is ready, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.